Hello again, and this is Norman Goh, and you're listening to our next episode of BMI, Bicara Minggu Ini, discussing current affairs, politics, and stories that matter to you. And over the past weekend, we've seen a huge majority win of the Barisan Nasional, and that's under Perikatan Nasional. I think sometimes we get confused between the two right now. Who's actually the winner? Is it Barisan Nasional or is it Perikatan Nasional? There was a slim by-election where the Barisan Nasional candidate won by over 10,000 majority votes. And in this next episode, we're not only going to discuss about the slim by-election, what's coming up in September as we celebrate the National Day today, 63 years or 57 years to as a federation. And today we have Dr. Bridget Welsh as our next guest in the Bicara Minggu Ini. So welcome to Bicara Minggu Ini.
Welcome. Nice to be here, Norman.
Yeah, and I know you're quite busy and you just got back from Sabah. So we'll talk about Sabah later on and in our discussion. So in the slim by-election, do you think what Najib has mentioned, that this is a return of power to Barisan Nasional? And we've also seen the rejection of 6 voting districts against Pakatan Harapan. What was going on?
I think there are 2 very important lessons. The first of which is that clearly the new Pakatan Nasional, which is the UMNO and PAS, which is, I think, really the big test, Bersatu not so much in Slim, is actually working quite well. This is we've had a stream of by-elections of which they've won successfully, and what we see, this formula of PAS and UMNO coming together actually wins them strategic victories. They collaborated despite significant differences that do exist on issues of seat allocation, issues in terms of the nature of candidate selection. The essence is that this is the formula for them to win seats, at least on the peninsula. And I think that's the first point. The second point is that this also shows the real serious weakness of Pakatan Harapan Plus. The results show that the coalition did not come together in terms of their supporters to come out to vote for them. Even if you look at the election results of in the past, not GE14, but all the way back to 2008, there was much more opposition support in this seat. And so what we saw, almost a boycott of some of the opposition supporters coming out. Was that about Mahathir? For some, it was. Was that about the contestation between Anwar and Mahathir? I would say some. But more fundamentally, it's about what Pakatan Harapan is standing for. And I think the infighting, the issues of leadership, the issues of the sense of kind of anger among voters that they gave up an opportunity to channel a different leadership structure, challenge a new form of governance, is still very raw. And I think electorally, Pakatan Harapan faces a big struggle.
So how was this slim by-election? Because this is considered the 4th or 5th defeat of Pakatan Harapan, and it was after Tanjung PI's by-election. There was the last straw on the back before the fall of Pakatan Harapan from federal government. And should there be a snap election called by Muhyiddin, how would this fare for Muhyiddin's faction in Bersatu?
So first of all, what is important to acknowledge that Pejuang was on the first kid off the block. And one of the things that did contribute to the very low majority, besides the issues of Pakatan Harapan more generally, is that they lack the machinery and they lack the nature of the campaigning that actually is expected in the new party. So I think one has to qualify a little bit of their performance, is that it could be seen as the glass as having some water in it as opposed to being completely empty. Now, in terms of Muhyiddin's performance in terms of Bersatu, a lot of it's going to come down to the seat negotiations. And of the seats that they have, roughly around 30, how many of those are going to still stay with Bersatu, and how many of those are going to be given to the other parties, and how many of those are also going to be contested. So it is clear that they did not announce the coalition because of a seat like Gombak, which of course is where Asman Ali contests, and there is was opposition both from PAS and from UMNO about Azman Ali holding on to that seat. And I think roughly my understanding is that anywhere from 70–80% of the seats have been sorted out. It's the remainder that are contentious and that cause the challenges. Now, Bersatu's performance, however, was not really tested so much in Slim, nor was it tested in the case of Chini by-election. Both of those contests were very much about UMNO. And the problems that UMNO is facing, and in fact, one has to recognize that both of those contests were against independent candidates, and they cannot be seen and judged on an equitable way in terms of a national election. I think that if these parties think that this is going to be the future, I think that they're overconfident. It's one thing to have a by-election where all the resources are there, they can solve all their problems, come together with some of their differences over a 2-week, 3-week period. That it's very different when it's stretched in the national contest. So I think that they cannot be overread. That said, I think the Sabah elections are going to be very important for determining the relationship between UMNO and Bersatu, but in particular for Bersatu's performance. Bersatu has a number of its members that are very old stalwart warlords in a number of seats, Masidi, Hajiji, both of which are traditional UMNO politicians, but are now with Bersatu. Bersatu will be contesting. It is clear among Sabah voters that Muhyiddin is popular. And he is popular for a number of reasons. The first of which is that they are very pleased with the aid that's happened during COVID-19 management, and particularly the PHS assistance, which has been online, and many people from very different walks of life have received them and have actually are grateful to the government. They see it in a grateful way as opposed to the realization that perhaps it's a deserved expectation. But there is this recognition and acknowledgement of him. And there are people who like his communication style, his low-key, not the politicking. And for many Sabahans, this is they don't like this kind of vitriolic type of politics.
So they prefer more like a breath of fresh air as well.
Yes. And Bersatu is new, and this is it gives people an opportunity to rise into the ranks, into a new machine, a new electoral machine. They see it from the perspective of a new opportunity, and I was quite surprised at the level of grassroots support, or at least political support in certain pockets for Bersatu, because Sabahans want change, and they don't see the same things that people in KL see, which has to do that Muhyiddin is really seen as an UMNO politician, coming back and bringing the practices of the past in terms of patronage and other issues. They see this as another opportunity, another an embrace of something different, and those two things are should be seen and reconciled from the very different perspectives that Sabahans have compared to those people here in the peninsula.
So when we look at Sabah itself, we're slowly moving into Sabah right now. So yeah, I think it's a good transition. Thank you, Bridget.
Well, more that I think Bersatu is going to be very... So Sabah becomes a place where Bersatu determines whether it has a national future. Yeah. All right. And
so it's just rather than UMNO versus Warisan in Sabah. So yes. It's more of a Bersatu survival will be, the litmus test for Bersatu itself will be in Sabah in the fight against Warisan. But then again, there's a problem with the warlords the UMNO warlords in Sabah. But then that wouldn't be a factor anyway, because would it be a factor, or wouldn't be a reason after all?
Well, look, it's clear that the UMNO Bersatu do not have a clear consensus on who will become their CM leader candidate. Whether or not Musa Aman contests is a big issue, and if he contests, then the contest is between Musa Aman and Shafi Abdal. But if it is an alternative, then you have many contenders. You have Bung Mokhtar Radin from UMNO, you have Hajiji from Bersatu, even Masidi. So there are different players groups. And even among some Karasan Dusun Murut, there's the conceptualization that they potentially will have another Karasan chief minister, such as Jeffrey Kiddidan. So I think that the issue of leadership is still being contested. But going back to what this means for the national picture, I think that the Bersatu's base is in Johor. And it is being in Johor, it contests itself directly against UMNO. And it's going to be very difficult to manage and to continue to maintain positions in Johor, given UMNO's heritage in that place.
Even Muhyiddin seems to be struggling with trying to hold the water and what's going on in Johor, and even the former Menteri Besar of Johor, Osman Sapian, is seen to be, cozying up to Pejuang.
Yeah, and this is why, that Sabah becomes a place that they want to have a foothold vis-a-vis their leverage with UMNO, but also to show that they're a national party. And so this is why it becomes important for them to kind of gain legitimacy. And also these Sabah election, because it's what I would say a real contest, which these other by-elections have not been, it's really the test of Muhyiddin's electoral support, because there will be resources and it's a very competitive election. So that's why I would say that this is a test for Bersatu in terms of its political future, and it will spill over, as will the spillover of what happens for UMNO in Sabah for the context of national picture.
So it looks like Muhyiddin is looking at the outcome of the Sabah state election, and GPS seems to be taking a seat back and taking a look and see attitude of whether should they have an election together with the national snap election, should they be. And because they still have a lot of time to go until June next year. And looking at how Mahathir started with Pejuang, and again, it lines up with the Mahathir loyalists within the party. And Mahathir is quite a formidable character himself. What do you think about this Pejuang party? Against, they will be fighting against the Malay electorates in a national level, for example. You have Pejuang, you have PAS, and you have UMNO fighting over the same cake of electorates. How will this play out eventually? With right now, Bersatu, it's forming its alliance with Pakatan Nasional, and that Malay-Islam partnership seems to be a better offer to the electorates, to the Malay electorates currently. How do you see that?
I think there's the short term and the long term. In the short term, it's no question that Pakatan Nasional has the advantage. They have machinery, they have resources, they have now a close collaborative relationship. Bersatu's coming into this, of course, will complicate things and does complicate things, but ultimately I think that these parties are pragmatic in recognizing the fact that seat negotiations have to be resolved. How well that will be accepted by those on the ground and whether or not they're able to resolve those differences as they did in Slim will be seen. But I think it's clear that Pakatan Nasional, if they sort themselves out, are in a very dominant position to win in the majority of Malay majority seats. And that can give them roughly anywhere from around 70 to 80 seats.
In the national level.
In the national level. Now, the Pakatan Harapan parties, the Malay parties, Pejuang and Amanah, really are facing very difficult circumstances. They relied heavily on non-Malay support to win power. They captured in GE14 only 25% of the vote among the Malay community.
That's less than 1/3. That's really difficult.
It's very difficult. And now that there are clear swings of disenchantment, disengagement among non-Malay support, among the more, would you say, change, reform-oriented Malays that exist within the context of the urban areas, I think that the Pakatan Harapan is facing facing some real serious challenges in places like Perak, as well as in places that are seen to be more reform-oriented, places such as Penang and in places such as
even within Selangor.
Even Selangor, yeah. But I would say that it becomes particularly difficult for Berjuang and Amanah to win Malay support in Malay seats, Malay majority seats in states like Terengganu, states such as Kelantan. And I think that even some of the seats that they're going to face, like take, for example, the seat of Lumut in Perak, where Amanah has a candidate, Dr. Hatta, I would say this is a real challenge for him to maintain and win that seat. And Berjuang in Kedah, even Mahathir himself will really struggle to maintain the Langkawi seat. And in fact, that may be his last hurrah if he chooses to contest there again in those areas. But I think this is the short-term discussion. Things are shifting and changing. The economy has been, in a sense, we've been living in a situation where things look okay. This is till the moratorium ends, until the circumstances of the international community, the longer term of this, start to come in. Ultimately, the Pakatan Harapan has to resolve its problems within, and that has been something that they haven't been able to do. And until they do that, they cannot recalibrate effectively with the electorate. But there is a recognition among Pakatan Harapan that there are these things to do. It's just very big differences of how they perceive that to happen. But for me, when I look at Berjuang long term, I thought there were two things I think that are worthy of emphasizing. So, number one, they're bringing out younger candidates, and their candidate, while he only did poorly in terms of the numbers, did quite well in terms of engaging with the electorate. And I think that this idea of bringing in and grooming younger leaders is a really important step. And one of the problems of the Malay parties is that they haven't brought in enough younger Malay leaders. And ultimately, you need younger leaders across the communities to begin for a different vision. And so I think I saw this extremely positively, that the engagement, the inclusion, and in that context. I think the second thing is that Malaysians are given more choices. And while people are frustrated that they can't see and differentiate those choices, and it's still largely personality-based, I think ultimately this broader transformation of politics that Malaysia is having, it gives people choices, is allowing them to rethink how they think about politics, how they engage politics, not just on party loyalty. Now, that's going to be more long-term rather than short-term. People are going to go with what they know, or the resources more likely. But the fact of the matter is that with this kind of coalition politics that provides for different competitive competition and sources, there are more opportunities for voters to recalibrate and to push parties into engaging. Berjuang, as it is, has no real policy platform. It's a personality vehicle, and until it transforms with younger leaders and takes on a better identity and a clear identity that is not just race-based, it's not going to go very far.
And we can see a departure from Mahathir's protege, Syed Saddiq, in his latest interview with various local papers, saying that he's going to break. I think the correct word was to disrupt Malaysian politics. His departure from a Malay-centric Bersatu, and he decided not to join Mahathir's Berjuang, although being as one of the closest confidant to Mahathir, and he wants to start something different. To represent the youth, and he wanted to build a platform for a multicultural, multi-religious platform for the youth. So how do you see with the movement with Syed Saddiq on the youth in politics?
I think it's a very positive development for Malaysia, in the sense that it is allowing younger Malaysians to have a vehicle of their own. The current political parties do not allow younger voices to raise.
Both sides, even Barisan Nasional and Pakatan Harapan, the old DAP parties, the same problem with PKR. I think the ones we're seeing right now are those from the Reformasi period. We have not seen a newer faces.
Well, I would only qualify that a little bit in that Azman Ali did groom a lot of younger leaders. And I think we're seeing some of them, such as the state and the Slanger state and so forth. But I would say that generally, younger leaders have not been allowed to rise, and there's been inadequate representation of that. And more importantly, younger leaders have been forced to follow the kind of mindset of follow the leader. And so they cannot speak out on parliament or issues if it's seen to challenge the leadership of their party.
And most of the time they get gag orders and things like that.
Of course. And what this means is that ultimately they become delegitimized. This is not to say that there aren't good leaders young leaders in the current parties. There are. Many of them have different visions. They speak out. They understand policy issues in a very robust way. They're very hardworking. They have different visions for the country. But at the same juncture, they're contained. When it's very difficult for good UMNO leaders to speak out when they have a leader like Zahid Hamidi and Najib leading the party. And so therefore they have to follow in these processes. The same thing happens is that in the PKR and DAP, older leaders can find the voices of the young. So in a sense, it's a very important start. And it is a phenomenon that is happening across Southeast Asia. In places such as Thailand and Indonesia, we see youth movements and youth political voices. Now, the real challenge is that this party cannot be Syed Saddiq. And if it is him, only him, he comes with baggage already. People associate him, as you've just said, with Mahathir. It has to be a group of people with leaders that are seen to be equal in voicing and issues, and it has to have a clear platform.
So moving away from that personality kind of politics, wherein both major coalitions are preaching at the moment.
Yeah, and you see, a youth movement that's seen as a political vehicle for a person to rise in politics is not a youth movement. It's a personal vehicle. And so this is the challenge, is to transform that into something broader and to have a clear program of where people can identify with that, to have a vision for a different Malaysia that doesn't take on the narratives of the past and is not constrained by the personality squabbles of the past, is a very important development. But the question becomes, given that there isn't that much, should we say, policy differences among the different parties, is where they're going to position themselves and what are the issues that they're going to speak about. It has to. If they do too much, then they risk the fact of not delivering. But they have to find the right pulse of what people want. And the issues that people care about the most are the economy. They care about inclusion. They care about a sense of reform or transformation. This is Hari Merdeka. Malaysians are extremely and rightly proud of their country, but they want it to be a country that is developing for the future and for young people, and they don't necessarily see that now. And this is where this youth movement has to be able to channel positive energy, not to kind of contribute to the polarization of the politics, which is really deeply compounded by race, religion, and different conceptualizations of democracy and reform.
Previously, I think there's another group of youth who wanted to start a new platform, but that didn't actually work out in a larger scale. So do you see this new platform for the youth will be a third force in coming years to come, in short term, in long term? How will this work out in forming, in moving away? Does this look like a transition from the old personality politics into a different participatory democracy time for youth?
Belum lagi lah. Not quite yet. It's not quite there. Okay, we haven't got to the position where the movement is basically defining itself. And keep in mind that youth movements are generation based, and there are going to be new youth that are going to come in and say, "Where are we in this picture?" You know, what exactly is youth? Is it people up to the age of 40? Is it up to the age of 30? Is it people in their teens and their 20s? So I think this is something that's going to be redefined. And it is important to recognize that there are many youth movements in Malaysia. There are many different perspectives. The youth is a large umbrella. And so while we talk about transformative forces that are more inclusive, there are also forces that are not as inclusive. And so my projection is that there'll probably be different youth movements that emerge, that also that try to be representative in their form. And is this healthy? Yes, it is, because there are different choices and different avenues. Is it potentially polarizing and divisive? Yes. And this is the real challenge, is whether or not the old rigid paradigm of racial politics, religious differences about how people see governance, really constrain and kind of imprint the youth movement, or the youth movement is able to move beyond this paradigm and to offer a new paradigm. And I think right now we haven't yet seen that, but I think people are interested. And I think it's interesting to know that many of the people who want to vote for the youth movement are actually not youth. They're looking at the youth movement for salvation, for a different transformative process for the country.
This is very interesting, because I spoke to a number of my friends who are lecturers. They actually brought up this question. They said, "What do you think about this new movement with Syed Saddiq, and you have the Undi 18, and you have the digital Parliament digital and all that? Do you think if she just throw a question, would you join or you support the new party?" And most of them would say yes. They're very interested. It's not just about Syed Saddiq. I think they want their voices to be heard. And do you think that this sort of response from the young people is just only subjected to those in the Klang Valley elite people? Or does this represent also some youth voices from the outskirts, from Sabah, from Sarawak, or even as far as Kelantan and Perlis?
For Digital Parliament, what was one of the most interesting features of that were the voices from outside. They focused on issues, they focused on policy problems. There were really clear, kind of substantive discussions of issues. And that was really one of its powerful messages, is that here are people not focusing on whether or not they can get position or contracts or money, or whether or not there can who's going to be what sort of position in the party, and it's me type of politics. It was a politics that was, hey, how about us? How about us thinking about what we can do better? How about we look at things in slightly different ways? And so Digital Parliament did represent those voices, and those voices are much more connected now with internet, with other social media, and I think there is an excitement. But keep in mind that at the same time, a lot of young people are not registered. I'll just give you an example of Selangor State. Of the voters that are under the age of 30, 41% of them in Selangor are not registered to vote.
That's big, 41%.
It's a huge, given that
it's a million. It's about a million plus.
So given Selangor's population, this is the numbers that are not registered to vote. And it's interesting because the change in voter registration processes that disallowed parties and NGOs from registering voters has had an impact. For example, in Sabah, the younger voters under the age of 30, at least a quarter of them are not completely registered at all. And so there is a kind of almost disenfranchisement. Now things will change from with the automatic registration that's scheduled for next year.
July 2021.
Yeah, but it's not necessarily clear whether or not that gap between 18 18-year-olds and 30-year-olds will be fixed. In fact, this is a huge gap in terms of what I would say almost disenfranchisement of younger voices. And in a sense, this is something that would have to be addressed to allow them to make sure that they have their representative rights. And I think a youth movement is something that can encourage that but right now, like young people in particular, have put a lot of hope in change, and we're very discouraged when their hopes were not actualized. And there's a lot of disgruntlement of promises not being fulfilled. And there's a considerable disengagement from politics, which becomes something that is a real challenge to make sure that a youth movement is inclusive.
I think how youth is going to vote will be a very interesting, the outcome in Sabah election or even in the general election. Things will be very, very different. I think we cannot entirely throw all the books outside the window, but how do you think the role of how Pakatan Harapan is going to move from this? Both Pakatan Harapan and Perikatan Nasional will be fighting for that support from the youth as well. And I remember James put out his comment about Pakatan Harapan must come out with a new model for the coalition itself. What do you think that how Pakatan will come into play in proving themselves again in the upcoming election?
I think we need to look at Malaysian history of how opposition politics has evolved. So when coalitions come together, they actually often split. And then there's a learning process that comes in, and then they recombine in different ways. And this time between splitting and recombining has actually shortened in the Malaysian context because people know each other and others. But I think what the recent experience shows is that personality differences of the past and policy differences of the past on issues of race and religion and others really need to be reckoned with in a more meaningful way. You can't come together pragmatically. The opposition felt that it solved its problem by getting into office. They didn't have a plan for governance. They had a plan to get into office, but not a plan for governance. And they relied too much on a person who was still very much tied to the past and not thinking of the future, and that was Tun Mahathir in that context. So the other ideas and issues never actualized, and they assumed that they were going to be there for a long time, and they didn't realize that they needed to do things that were more substantive earlier on. And as a consequence, their legacy has been really seriously undercut. So in this context, we have to say, what is the history going to teach us about this opposition politics? It is my view that Pakatan Harapan will transform itself. A breakup is likely.
Wow. We see that coming very soon.
Yeah, well, I think that it's already broken up in some ways, all right? We saw that some parties are moving out and others. Mm-hmm. That doesn't mean that you still don't have alliances and others. But I think that the delegitimation that parties have faced, so among their grassroots, is being evident in the election results, even in SLIM. I mean, if you are DAP and looking at the SLIM results, you have to ask yourself, okay, where is my party going to do in terms of my traditional support base? And if you're PKR, even if you stayed home and didn't vote there, and you think that's the reason the majority was there, don't fool yourself. The shifts were not just your supporters. The shifts are happening across the board. And PKR as a multiracial party needs the response from others. And if you alienate others, this comes back to you within your coalition partners because you need to work together. So there is considerable strain in Pakatan Harapan, of which I think these elections in Sabah and in SLIM and have provided an opportunity for them to come to terms with the realities of the legacy of a failed of the weaknesses of their own administration. And I think it will be a question of how much time they would have between now and a national election. Some say that there could easily be an election as early as October or November this year. It may also be later in the context till next year, or if Muhyiddin is probably clever and doesn't want to spend the money for the resources that an election costs, which are billions of ringgit.
So at least 1 billion. That's what the EC mentioned.
Well, at least that's the official numbers.
Yeah.
But you must multiply that, because the 20%, 20%, 20%. We're talking about, easily during the 2013 1MDB election, we're talking about 4 to 5 billion ringgit that might have been spent in that election. But money politics is shifting. That's a different topic. But what I would say is that the issues that are fundamental is how much of the lessons they're going to learn, and how they're going. And I think this formula of working through these elites, not having clear policy platforms, making the election about Najib, this is not working.
And they seem to be still stuck on romanticizing Najib over and over again. I mean, we have shown that during the Pakatan Harapan government, continuously romanticizing over Najib will not work, because Najib will just reap his popularity out from it. And they can't seem to just move away, or even put new faces, fresh faces, some fresh breath of fresh air in that. Even after 6 months, we don't see much of change within Pakatan Harapan. And the only thing I remember, I had the last discussion with Fahmi Fadel, the director of comms from PKR, said they are trying to clean up the party and all that, but we don't see much of change within PKR. It's just people moving out, and then that's it. There's no clear platform, no clear messaging from Pakatan Harapan. Now, what do you think of that?
Well, Pakatan Harapan's real challenge was that they didn't have good messaging while they were in office. Mm-hmm. So it's not a surprise that they don't have good messaging after. I think that the fact of the matter is that they have to present a narrative, and I think they do understand that the attacks on Pakatan Harapan have been significant. Take for example the attacks on Lim Guan Eng.
The continuous attack on DAP, the easiest scapegoat among the Pakatan Harapan to say DAP is anti-Malay, anti-Islam, and no one will actually step up and defend them. And it's funny to see Mahathir seemed to be the loudest one to defend DAP and of all this attacks on DAP.
Well, Anwar wasn't as loud as Mahathir in that situation. But I would say, however, it's not about these personality issues. Is that the fact of the matter is that in a large section of the Malaysians' electorate, there is this doubt about him as finance minister. In terms of the deal
this is
making
referring to
Lim Guan Eng. Mm-hmm. And so and the response that DAP has is we have to build solidarity, that it's they dismiss it, they denigrate the discussions, and they attack this in a kind of polarizing way. And they don't realize that this is not going to win them over the people who have questions. Right? And they're also reinforcing the sense that they're aggressive, that they're attacking, and they don't control the messaging. That in this environment right now, the media is still back to the old situation. Right? So people who believe, their supporters believe in them very strongly, and they see this as a political attack, and they see these in a particular way. But for those that are outside of those echo chambers, in living in a different media environment, the impact and the message, the image of DAP and Lim Guan Eng has been very badly affected. And it's not enough to say I'm innocent. You need to convince people, and you need to engage them in a way that is meaningful. And I think that the DAP challenge in Pakatan Harapan is a significant one for the Malay-based parties.
And we can also see that their Secretary General, Lim Guan Eng, is expected to step down by the end of this year. I think the election is the party election will be October, November. I think about the same time with, after Sabah election. It might be earlier, it might be this month, we don't know. But there'll be a change of leadership in DAP. And we are also seeing more and more Malay leaders from DAP stepping up. And even the non-Malay leaders of DAP is coming up in using more of the national language itself. And I remember speaking to some of the DAP leaders. They say that it's very interesting to see a lot more Malays who are, inquiring about joining DAP. Why do you see this? Well, what do you think about this? The interests of Malays in taking part in political parties like DAP.
How many is, in terms of the overall percentage of Malay community, I think is still relatively small. But I think more generally, younger people are looking for different political vehicles. We were talking earlier about Bersatu. We're talking about DAP. All right, they're looking for different ways that can allow them to have advancement. Keep in mind, if you're a young Malay, you can advance very quickly in the context of a DAP. And they are looking also to the ideals that the DAP is a party in terms of reform that they feel that the other Malay parties are not offering them. And Bersatu and UMNO and PAS have rejected reforms. And so the options that Malays have, they look strategically at these things beyond advancement in terms of the representation of their interests. And the fact is that the Malay community is very diverse, and they're a large share are very conservative, but many are actually quite liberal and who would like a more better governance. They would like a more professionalization of politics. DAP, I think, did very well in the Pakatan Harapan government in terms of the policy side. And their performance in many of the ministries was among the best. And ironically, that created resentments by others. But at the same juncture, it showcased that when you have people of merit and talent come in, they perform, they raise issues, they try to change policy discussions. And keep in mind, younger people today have more information, they're more educated overall, and they are looking, they're interested in areas such as the environment, or interested in digital technology, the data analytics. These are very talented individuals who would look to political parties to kind of harness some of their talents and to allow them to have advancement within those talents.
I think moving from national politics right now, I think probably another session with you is that if you remember, Dr. Ong Kian Ming wrote about the rise of the larger number of Malays in a lot of urban areas. Actually, one of the things I'm interested to find out more is that are there a lot more educated Malays who have gone abroad? Are they becoming more and more conservative in their views and things like that? I think I'll discuss with you on that in the other episode, because this is one of the few things that I really want to look at how the Malay perception and also how they view policies and politics in a matter. If they're in an urban area, how different they are compared to the rural people. Are they more accepting in more progressive policies and compared to rural areas? I think we will discuss that in the next episode. I think to the last part, I think the most important thing, because this September is the state election in Sabah. And he just got back from Sabah. How are things in Sabah? And we've seen Shafi Abdal crisscrossing the state, giving out grants of their land titles and all that. How was the feeling on the ground?
Well, we've seen Muhyiddin Yassin visiting as well. So
yeah, last week, right?
On Saturday and Saturday and Sunday, and we see politicians on the ground from the very complex situation in Sabah mobilizing. There's still a bit of wait situation because many of the candidates have not been finally decided. And so many of the campaigns have not really started, although some have began at the state level. And there's a lot of jockeying happening among the different parties. But Sabah's politics are very different than Semenanjung's politics. And I think they're different in, I would say, 4 very important ways. The first of which is that while personality politics matter in Malaysia and people continue to see things like movements in personality terms, I would say the personalities are about personality differences here. In Sabah, the seats are small. people want to know their candidate, want to be able to connect to them. The personal networks that they exist in matter, and their personal standing in the community, how well they service the community, is extremely important. Bung Mokhtar is an extremely important, extremely popular in his kawasan in Lamang. Beautiful river, visited, and he's beloved. And he will win. And kinabatangan, right, in that situation. So in the Kinabatangan constituency of the parliament, but he's in Lamang in his state seat. So what I would say is that personality politics are very important. The second thing to understand is that the suku, which is the ethnic communities, there are over 100 different ethnic communities in Sabah. And these differences matter. New seats have been created around these particular multi-sub-ethnic communities, as they were in Sarawak. And they provide these ethnic smaller groups greater representation. So, for example, we see one seat that has been created around the Iradun community. We also see the inter-ethnic divisions within the Malay community, Muslim community. You have Bajau, you have Suluk, you have Bugis, you have Javanese, you have Orang Brunei. These are all Orang Sungai. They are all different groups, which from outside they think about them as all Malay, but they're not, and they don't conceptualize themselves that way. And they have different voting patterns in different constituencies, and they has this different connection that is mobilized and harnessed in particular ways. The third thing is that there is the coalitions. There are many parties. There are many more choices, and so there's a tendency now to want to see this thing as a binary contest, aka Musa versus Shafi. That's not going to be the case. All right, there's new leaders that are emerging, and others. It's not clear whether Musa Aman is going to contest, right? And it's not. And they want to see it as Warasan versus UMNO in this area. But in fact, in Sabah politics, that's not the case. There are multiple parties, and right now it's not clear whether or not there will be coalitions that work together, or whether or not there'll be three corner fights.
Even more. Again, we have seen up to 7 corner fights in Sabah before.
Oh yes, a lot of people will contest. Many of those are independents, but now it's about party based. Will PKR be part of Warasan? Big question. Will PBS, which is the traditional Karasan Dusun Murid party, will that be part of the broader coalition? And then they're all discussing logos, right? I think that it's likely that although PN wants to push their particular perspective, my sense is that ultimately it's going to be BN as the coalition, with UMNO being the major party within that, in that area. I think the fourth big shift in the context of understanding Sabah is that they think about the federal very differently. And it's not nice there's a negative sense about the federal government taking away their powers, not abiding by the MA63 agreement, not providing the resources to the state. While state nationalism was very important in G14.
So it's like sama-sama with Sarawak, but still uniquely different in Sabah.
Of course it is. And in this context, if someone like Azman Ali or Mahathir or Anwar come to campaign, which they're all, might do. Azman has already been there, and Anwar is projected to be there, I understand. My sense is that their messages are seen for different eyes. So Mahathir, for example, is blamed very strongly for the illegal immigrants.
The project I see in Sabah is still a tainted person.
And this is arguably one of the biggest issues in this campaign. In fact, he's hurts Shafi Abdal, and he angers the voters. And the KDM, the Karasan Dusun Murid community, are in many ways, they are the kingmakers in this Sabah election. And so this combination of different ethnic groups, different party coalitions, different ways that they conceptualize politics, locally, personal, makes for a very different context. And it is very complicated from outside because people want to see the paradigms of, the issues of frogging, you take away the government type of situation from this perspective. But that's, in Sabah, there are different types of frogs. They like some frogs and they don't like others. And I think this is what people don't understand from outside.
Yeah, it's easy to generalize certain things at the federal level compared to Sabah. And, the issues of party hopping in Sabah, I think it's way longer than that. I think for the past many decades, we've seen that before, because changing different types of coalition, different types of formation, of allegiance, the power to play. And over the past history, I mean, that's Sabah. And you have better chances to win as an independent candidate in Sabah. But what do you think about family relations? Where in Sarawak, it's very prominent when you come from certain family lineage and all that. Does that play too in Sabah?
Extremely important. Family networks, standing in the local community, your church networks, which church you're part of, your relationship to church leaders, your relationship to your Muslim imam in your mosque in some of the areas. These are really critical because of the personalized nature of politics, people knowing each other. I think there is one other big point that I think is important to get across, Norman, and that is a lot of people from the peninsula, they denigrate Sabahans. They say, oh yes, they just took 50 ringgit or 100 ringgit, they can be bought. And they dismiss them as uninformed, uneducated. They say that they implicitly, they think that they're lacking
knowledge and all that.
Lacking choices, lacking, that they're manipulative, they're vulnerable. And I think, this image is a very wrong one. Sabahans make strategic choices for themselves.
This reminds me of the
Sarawak
state election too.
And they do so in very informed ways.
Yeah.
And I think that, every time someone denigrates them, it only reinforces the sense that of distance of the Sabah experience from what is here. And I think, when you go to these local villages and places like in Pensiangan, like Nabawan and others, which are seen to be resource-oriented campaigns, do not ever, my experience is that the voters there make their choices based on who's going to provide them a better quality of life. And they're not being bought. They're choosing to take the money to make their own decision the way that they want to do among the different sets of choices that they have.
Well, how do you see, will you be heading off to Sabah again?
I hope so. Sabah's a beautiful state.
Yeah, and then probably I'll be seeing you in Sabah. Maybe it's just have some tea again in Sabah. Sabah tea is pretty good.
Well, I think we can have lovely durian, lovely terap, all the different fruits of Sabah, and some tea as well.
And of course, I think Sabah people has a lot to teach us about, sometimes, things are very, very different in Sabah, even in Sarawak. And I noticed that there's a similar trend with how Sabahans are voting and Sarawakans are voting. If they are voting for the state election, they will take a different stance when they vote in the federal election, because they take things very pragmatic. They are very pragmatic in making their choices because they know where their bets are. So I think thank you very much for sharing your views and your thoughts with me, Bridget, today, and Selamat Hari Kebangsaan to you too.
Selamat Hari Merdeka, and it's great to speak with you, Norman, and I think that I'm looking forward to Sabahans showing the way of what they think about the future, and I think that it's very good that they have this opportunity to send messages and to be participatory and to be appreciated. I
think they may be sending us a message about what is the good model for Malaysians in general. So I think after Sabah election, there more work for us too. there'll be Sarawak state election coming up for us.
Well, we'll see how that plays out. I think the Chief Minister has been putting them off for some time, but we'll see how it does. But I think besides political analysis, I think, during this RMCO period, Sabah's a beautiful state to visit. And I want to say personally, I was extraordinarily impressed with how much they followed the SOPs in many rural areas. People were wearing masks, and many of those masks were donated by local Sabahans to the communities. And people really took care of each other in a way that I think was quite inspirational. So my hat's off to them.
All right. Thank you so much, Bridget. And you can follow her on Twitter at Dr. Irish SEA, Dr. Irish C, DRIRSIRISHSEA. So you're listening to Bicara Minggu Ini, uncovering current affairs and politics, and you can listen to the stories and interviews on Spotify, Anchor, Google Podcasts, and Apple Podcasts on iTunes. For more updates and stories, if you have any suggestions, you can tweet to me at I'mNomGo. Thank you for listening, and do support me by subscribing to the show. And if you'd like to contribute to support the podcast, do send me a message on Twitter. You can find me on Facebook, and maybe sometimes you can chat with me. Send me a message, drop me a message on Twitter, on Instagram. Thank you.
Thanks, Norman.
Thank you.